Welcome, everyone. Hello and welcome to the first Naturehood webinar of 2023. Very exciting. I'm just going to give everyone a minute to get settled in. Again, hello, welcome to our first Naturehood webinar of 2023, Gardening with Kids. Our numbers are still going up. I'm so excited to see all of you joining us here tonight. Thank you for sharing your evening with us. We have a wonderful few presentations coming your way in just a minute. All right, so again, hello everyone. And again, welcome to our first webinar of 2023, Gardening with Kids. My name is Jen Aguilar. I'm the Education Program Coordinator with the California Native Plant Society. So as everyone continues to settle in, please feel free to share where you're joining in from. And in light of our theme today, Gardening with Kids, please feel free to share any ways you're already encouraging the youth in your life to connect with the plants around them. And you can do that via the chat feature. So we'd love to see where you're joining in from. And if you have any ways that you're already engaging the youth in your life, please feel free to share. We'd love to hear more about that. All right, so for today, we'll be together for about an hour until 6:30. For those that have to leave early or jump off for any reason, please know that today's webinar will be recorded and available on the CNPS YouTube channel within a few days. So please check back on our YouTube channel for the recording of this webinar. Some folks just want to watch it over and over again. So this is a great opportunity to do that. All right, so today we have three wonderful speakers that will share more about their experience and expertise in engaging youth in garden spaces. So garden spaces, as many of us know, or maybe all of us know, are lush with learning opportunities and can be a great space that offers youth a chance to connect with both nature and culture. So here you can see a list of our speakers, and today we'll hear more about what they do, how they do it, and hopefully leave with some inspiration on how we can engage the youth in our lives in our garden spaces. So we are going to begin our presentations with Chantel Ochoa-Clark. So Chantel Ochoa-Clark received her Bachelor of Arts in History with a minor in Geography from CSU Dominguez Hills, as well as an MAT in Museum Education from George Washington University, where she was awarded the Marcelo Brenner Endowment as a reflection of her academic performance and leadership and service. So along with her degree, Chantal has received a certification as an interpretive guide from the National Association for Interpretation and a certification as a California naturalist from the University of California's Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. So a big welcome to Chantal, and please, Chantal, take it away with screen sharing.
Perfect. Okay. Let's see if we can do this. I know we practice, but technology. Okay, hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, so we'll get started. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. As Jen said, my name is Chantel Ochoa-Clark, and I'm the manager of K-12 education programs for the UCLA Mildred E. Mathias Botanical Garden. So before I get started on how gardens are used for K-12 education, I want to talk a bit about what I do, which is informal education. So informal education or learning is a type of learning that happens every day, whether we realize it or not. It's organic, it's unstructured, and it's learner-driven. And informal education takes place outside of what we think of as traditional learning settings like classroom. If we think about it, it's how we learn almost all the time. So for example, if you're reading a book and you come across a word that you don't recognize, or if you're playing a video game like the kids and you are trying to pass a level and you don't know how, you tend to research it. You either Google it or you go on YouTube and you find the answers. And that's pretty much learning that was unplanned. And that's what informal education is all about. It's unintentional learning. Here at the Botanical Garden, our mission is to promote botanical knowledge and appreciation of nature. One way that we do that is through our events and our programs. The garden is one of the most treasured landmarks here at the UCLA campus, and it was originally founded in 1929 as an experimental horticulture garden that has since then transformed into an outdoor teaching center and a research space. And it's home to more than 3,000 different species. Along with the garden, we also have an herbarium with a collection of over 140,000 different specimens that include a comprehensive collection from the Santa Monica Mountains. One of the programs that I oversee in the garden is the K-12 field trips. And as one of our favorite educators in the garden, David Sobel, said, "Give children a chance to love the earth before we ask them to save it." And that's precisely what we are trying to do here with our K-12 programs. One of the biggest challenges for children in urbanized environments is limited access to natural spaces. In LA County, this deficit is especially pronounced in regions where Title I schools are located. And to meet the need, we started a program called Next Step. This program focuses on partnering with Title I schools to offer science-based active learning experiences in a natural setting. And for those of you who are not familiar with Title I schools, there are schools that receive additional funding because mostly about 40 or more % of the population in that school are within the poverty line. A recent grant that we received last year actually allowed us to develop educational resources to add an active learning lesson to what we originally offered, which was the standard guided tour. Additional grants since then have helped us gather enough money to reimburse Title I schools for their transportation as they make their way to the garden. And because of the pandemic and everything that's been happening, buses have actually got increased in prices for LAUSD. So typically a bus would range for about $80 an hour to book. And that has actually increased to $110 an hour. So what was something of a big expense before has only gotten even more expensive. So making it even more difficult for schools, especially those Title I schools, to travel out in search for these informal education opportunities. Here at the garden, we're very proud to be an admission-free public garden. And with these new K-12 programs, we seek to bring in more students to enjoy nature. So here at the garden, we offer school trips on Wednesdays and Fridays from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. And they're led by our amazing volunteers who are a mixture of UCLA students and members from our community. And of course, we wouldn't be able to do all this without them. All the students that come for their school trips get a tour of the garden, which focuses on plant adaptations. Because we do have different areas. We have a desert garden area, we have a California native plant area, a forest, and we have a stream. So there's a lot of different habitats. So we talk to them about plant adaptations in different environments. And teachers also get to choose 2 different activities that they would like their students to participate in. So we do basket weaving, which was taught to us by Loren Sisquak, a descendant of the mountain Cahuilla, tribe, and she was kind enough to teach us a method to do basket weaving with natural plant resources. We also do botanical illustrations, animal encounters. We work with plant specimens. We even do flower dissections, and soon we'll have a carnivorous plant collection. And after their trip, the students are welcome to explore the garden, with the big emphasis that even though we are a garden, we are a living museum. And not only do they get to explore the garden, but they also get to explore the UCLA campus. And for many of these students, it's the first time that they ever come to a natural space like a botanical garden, or even to a campus like UCLA. When we first started thinking about our K-12 programs and how they would be shaped, we thought of different philosophies. And to do that, we looked at different educators. And the first was Richard Louv, who argues that without contact with the natural world, many people will experience what he called natural deficit disorder, which can cause a lot of different issues like physical and emotional illnesses, diminishes senses, and affects attention. He believed that the best way to protect nature in general was to inspire love and a deep connection to it. We also looked into David Sobel, who I quoted earlier, and his philosophy is more about place-based education. And this type of education emphasizes on hands-on, real-world learning experiences that increases academic achievement. And place-based learning is used a lot in informal education because it develops stronger ties to communities, and it enhances students' appreciation of the natural world. And it also creates a heightened commitment to serve as an active contributing member in society. We also looked into the philosophy of John Dewey, who thought about inquiry-based learning. And Dewey has a lot of different other philosophies, but this one spoke to us because he believed that education should be focused on student rather than the content that's being taught in the classrooms, and it should be meaningful. And last but not least, we also thought about Abraham Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, which we use to make sure that we are meeting our audience's needs regardless of what activity or program we're doing. And I'm just going to take a very quick moment to put that hierarchy of needs, because it's a pretty big one, and I am more than happy to have this slide accessible afterwards. But this is how we use Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs when we're doing tours for kids or even for the general public. This academic year alone, we will have served over 1,000 students, which is the most ever recorded here at the garden. However, for us, this isn't a number game. It's about the meaningful experiences that students have after their visit. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you come and visit us. And if you're interested, I have written down the times that we're open. We're open Monday to Sunday. And yes, I'm plugging myself in there. If you have any questions, or if you're a teacher or know a teacher who would want to come and participate, I'll be more than happy to work with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chantel. And that's what a great space for folks to take the youth in their lives, especially if there isn't an accessible garden space, right in the vicinity of where they live. And, it's a great opportunity for youth to just engage in seeing some of these wonderful native plants and just ecosystems all throughout the garden space. All right, next up we have Anjali Berger. Anjali Berger is an experienced K-12 educator and teacher trainer. Raised in Los Angeles, Anjali is passionate about the beauty and importance of Southern California native ecology. She believes in experiential and joyful learning and currently serves as the education manager at the Theodore Payne Foundation. Welcome, Anjali.
Hi, thank you so much, Jen. Chantal, that was amazing. 1,000 students. That is so incredible. It's really lovely to be here. My name is Anjali, and I work at the Theodore Payne Foundation, which is 22 acres of native plants nursery. We're also a nonprofit in Sun Valley. And right now, we are doing some very exciting things with K through 12, which is thinking about curriculum that can express itself across content areas. So for those of you who are educators on and feeling constrained by standards or testing, or you don't have access to a garden, hopefully what we talk about today is just, we'll touch on a little bit of how you can bring this work immediately into your classroom, starting with, you know, if you have 5-minute free write in the morning with a video text or a visual, or even anything that you can bring from the outside. So please let me know if there's anything that you can see or not see, because I have a... So the premise of this curriculum is the genius technology of my being meets the genius technology of another being. And this is to seat our students in the empowerment of their own body, their eyes, their nose, their mouth, their ears, their minds, their curiosity, their opinions, their thoughts. And it's from that place of being centered that we then greet relationship building and learning with anything outside of ourselves, plants, animals, fungi, stones. And we have this framework of a genius technology meets the genius technology to understand that when we learn about the wisdom, expression, and form of something such as the little tiny hairs in a plant, or the coloration, or the shape of a leaf, that we're really looking at wisdom expressing itself. And that's where the teaching is happening. And we also really want to teach in a way that's constantly engaging our children from their center. And all of the educators that Chantal referenced speak to this. And this idea that instead of, you know, education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. I think William Butler Yeats said that, but it's that we're constantly growing from the capacity that we have. And I'm not going to read this, but this is an excerpt from Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass. And it's an anecdote about a young indigenous boy in Ecuador who was leading an expedition and sharing the different names of plants in different languages, and was complimented on knowing the names. And he says, "Yes, sir, I have learned their names, but I have yet to learn their songs." And so when we think about what does it mean to learn the song of a plant, it requires a sense of depth, a sense of observation, a sense of relationality, and of time. And so when we think about learning, we're thinking of a deepening over time. And the ways to teach those plants in that relational framework, right? Hitting, I'm going to start with the solitary and the social, because I think it's so vital that when we are in relationship with this learning, that we have time to be alone, and we also have time to be in partners. And it also hits the ways that all of us excel as different learners. So when we think about our students, some students, I was working at a garden the other day, and you know, one of the students that just cannot sit still in the classroom, you give him a shovel and everything clicks in, and all of a sudden he feels incredibly focused, he's incredibly helpful and incredibly intuitive. And what I touch on a little later in this presentation is that you don't need to have access to a garden to be kinesthetic. We're going to talk about how we can embody this learning with our bodies, and how kinesthetic learning, physical learning, body learning is so important. And this native plant content has places across our content areas. Unfortunately, a lot of our public schools are losing time for science and for arts and for other expressions to focus only on ELA and math because of testing. And so the goal and the hope is that we can find ways to weave this important and meaningful curriculum through content areas. ELA skills, reading, writing, listening, and speaking, you can do so much of that native plant learning through these skills. And if we have time, I have some examples of a 9th and 11th grade social studies teacher, who's a history and social studies teacher, who's using California native plants as the foundation of her curriculum. These are some magic keys. This is a way that we teach literacy. And I call magic keys because they reinforce relationship, and they reinforce actually very access to rich content area. So the Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, who Jen and I are in collaboration with over some of this curriculum, they have these beautiful videos of poppies time-lapsing in different times of the sun. One video is on a very sunny day, and another video is on a very cloudy day. And so by just pairing those two texts, which we'll talk about later, and asking students to ask them what they see, what they notice, and what they feel, invites a lot of wisdom to come naturally through, but also it opens up students to want to receive rich content that they're either going to then go research on their own or will be shared by the teacher or whoever is in guidance. And so I see, I notice, I wonder, this makes me think, I feel, this connects to, I know. These are sentence stems that you can use over and over and over, and that's not really going to change. What's going to change is the content that you're sharing with. And so here we have some images of beautiful sacred datura, and dropping in, what do you see? What do you notice? Seeing and noticing is a little bit distinct. Seeing can happen something right away, and noticing takes a little bit of time. What do you notice? And in fact, if you sit with one picture, what you notice immediately or what you see is going to deepen, right? At the bottom right picture, the first thing I notice is the flower blooming. And with a little more time, I'm noticing the grasses that are growing around it. And I'm noticing some of the holes in the leaves. And I'm noticing the shape of the bud to the right. And so this is how we deepen learning. This is talking about the kinesthetic aspect, and this is how we can bring it in wherever you are, any time or place. These are 4 basic body moves, and I'm going to include this in the resource link. There's a YouTube video called on EdChat, Dance for Body Shapes, and it breaks down the language of movement into pin, ball, wall, and twist. And a pin, and it is anything you can do with your body. So a straight up pin, a pin with your finger, a pin with your hands. It can be on the floor. I can lie straight on the floor on my stomach. A ball is balling up any part of your body or self. Again, it can be a kind of a small ball. It can make your whole body a ball. You can be on the floor. You can be on a chair. A wall is opening up your body wide. Really, really wide. And it can be, again, however you want to do this, lying on your stomach, back against the wall, making something really wide with your hands or face. And a twist is twisting up a part of your body. Could be your fingers, could be your legs, could be your whole body twisting. And having these 4 steps allows students to interpret what they see around them. And so if we look at these pictures of the chaparral yucca and we drop in, where do you see a wall? Where do you see a pin? Where do you see a ball? Where do you see a twist? You could have students look at one picture at a time and everybody do pin, ball, wall, twist. You could have them move from one picture to the other using those different movements. And the exciting thing is that every student is going to see something different. So I tell teachers when we're in workshop, remember you have a set in a traditional classroom of 30 eyes, and every single one of those eyes is going to see from their own vantage point. And by sharing what every set of eyes sees, you create a bigger vision. And so you are going to see something and interpret something that someone else is not going to see. Here we have the mountain mahogany. Again, if you're able to join and you're looking at the screen, find a place, express one of the pictures using pinball, wall, or twist. And you don't have to do this just with your body. You can do this using drawing. You can ask students to interpret the drawing of a plant, either outside in front of the plant or using a visual picture of the plant. What do you see using pinball, wall, twist? And this can dissolve some of the anxiety that our students have about being perfect about how they draw. You can also have two kids next to each other. Again, we go back to that social way of learning. Turn and talk. One person shares and points to where they see pinball, wall, and twist. And the other person either listens or records, and you take turns. And so one of the things is, how do we meet the standards? And that's a whole nother webinar where we can go really in depth. But one of the ways that you can immediately hit a lot of standards is by doing something called a paired text. And we already looked at that by looking at multiple images. And so here we have an example. I think I saw Carol on this call. We have two books. Chantal mentioned the Kawiya, the indigenous teacher of the Kawiya language. This is the Temupak, which is Kawiya Indian knowledge usage of plants by Catherine Siva Saubel from the Malky Museum. And this is a book that references a lot of the California native plants through the lens, the language, and the history of Kawiya Indian knowledge. And then you have California native plants for the garden, which is a beloved and highly recommended book about California native plants. And using these two texts together allows one to have a bigger understanding. And so when we think about pairing texts, we're thinking about building on knowledge, but we're also thinking about using our minds to compare and contrast. And through that comparison and contrasting, you generate a lot of wisdom. You have that inside of you, and then you also ready to receive it. So just by having students, anything can become a text, right? Did I bring it with me? Yes. A clipper is a primary source. This is a text. Everything is a text. You look to the left and you look to the right and you ask students, encourage them. What do you notice? What do you see? What do you wonder? What do you look? What's the difference? What's the similarities? And then you go into, well, why? And what do you think one is used for versus the other? This translates to looking at paired text in, let's look at a hummingbird. What do you notice about the beak of the hummingbird and all parts of it? Let's look at a heron. And just from comparing and contrasting these two, using these as texts, students, one of the standards that's across ELA and across grades is supporting your thinking with evidence. So asking students to go back to the text to pull out evidence. Well, what's the evidence here? The evidence are the shapes, the sizes, the coloration, the behavior. And then it is from asking these questions, what do you see? What do you wonder? What do you think? That you can generate ideas, but you can also then insert the content. Well, the children are now hungry. What does the hummingbird eat and how? What does the heron eat and how? And here, after you bring in two, and you've lived in two, it's really easy to meaningfully bring in a third. I just want to make sure I'm okay on time because we still have, okay, I have a couple more minutes. And here's the waxwing on the toyon. And so here you have a bird of a different beak. And so you can continue to build in rigorous thinking and deeply expand on content from engaged interest. Here we have, you can't do this better than with seeds. Seeds just are so engaging. You can use pictures, you can use actual seeds. This is an easy way to bring this into the classroom too. You can bring these texts in so children can touch them, can look. Genevieve Arnold has created a beautiful seed museum that we have on site, and teachers can definitely do this and create a center in their own classes. Here we have compare and contrast. Use your body movements, draw, turn and talk. What do you see? What are all the similarities and the differences? And immediately minds are open and ready to engage. So bring the outside in and the inside out, which is, we have this beautiful set of flashcards, which is a great way to get started for parents, for educators, for any age. You can carry them around with you. You can sort. They hit a lot of differentiated ways of learning, visual, they're bilingual, kinesthetic. And you can bring these texts into the classroom. You can bring in leaves, you can bring in seeds, you can bring in pictures, put them, these are ways to engage without the garden. And when we say bring the outside in and the inside out, bringing the outside in is kind of what I was talking about, but bringing the inside out is really thinking about twofold. One, just try and get outside whenever you can. Anyway, you don't have to have a garden. But the second is thinking about what's happening on the inside of the student and trying to bring that forward when you're in relationship. I'm going to end with the Zaretta Hammond culturally responsive teaching in the brain, which has a worksheet of the culture tree. And a teacher that I work with, Rabia Qasim Clay, please visit her Instagram at Welcome Brilliant Minds, has done this with her students. And she has invited them all to choose a plant of cultural importance for them and to understand themselves through the structure of the plant. And then from there, she's been introducing California native plants, and already and immediately the relationship is there and profound. So please come visit us at the Theater Pain Foundation. My name is Anjali. I think my email will be included in the resource list. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anjali. It's so wonderful to hear and learn more about just how many ways there are for youth to feel connected to garden spaces, whether that's through movement, through observation, through considering, right? The list goes on and on. So that was a beautiful, beautiful presentation. Thank you. All right, and next up we have Noelle Nicholas. Noelle Nicholas works as an educational content manager for Kids Gardening, a national nonprofit dedicated to creating opportunities for kids to play, learn, and grow through gardening, engaging their natural curiosity and wonder. Noelle develops Kids Gardening original educational materials, including activities, lesson plans, curriculum, and more for educators and caregivers to access and implement in their communities. In her spare time, she runs a school garden program at 3rd Street Elementary in Hancock Park for pre-K through 5th grade students. And prior to joining Kids Gardening, Noelle worked as a museum educator at the Natural History Museum of Los Angeles County, developing and delivering programs for diverse multi-generational audiences, as well as for Tinker Garden, leading nature-based play classes for toddlers in her neighborhood of Miracle Mile. Noelle stays very busy. Welcome, Noelle.
Hi, everyone, and just really excellent job, Anjali and Chantal. Thank you guys so much for sharing about what you do and all of these really fantastic things to keep in mind and consider when you're engaging kids, talking about plants. I will share my screen. There we go. So Jen just shared a little bit about me, but I'm going to be focusing my presentation a little bit less on my organization, Kids Gardening, which is a fantastic online resource, kidsgardening.org. You can find lots of free activities, lesson plans, things to download, and lots of inspiration. We do highlight different garden programs all around the country every month, so you can read articles about other garden programs and what people are doing with kids. But my expertise is kind of in a lot of different areas. I've always been somebody with multiple jobs. I like to have my fingers in a lot of different pots, but it always, for the past 10 years, has involved children and just multi-generational audiences and creating ways to engage with people. Lately, that's been around plants. I've been a gardener my whole life. My dad kind of handed that down to me. And so I'm going to really share with you just kind of my why. Why do you want to garden with kids? Maybe this is not something you're doing already. Maybe you have a garden at home, or you are have been interested in botany, and maybe you have kids in your life you can share this with. So I really think creating opportunities to connect with and care about nature is so important. I think my fellow presenters did a great job of explaining the why there. And I actually had that David Sobel quote ready to share, Chantal, as well. It's one of my favorite quotes. It's our job to make the next generation have these opportunities to fall in love with nature. That's our job, so that we can then ask them to care about the environment and save it into the future. So I really think that when it comes to gardening with kids, you are going to be a full success if you can just give them a positive association with nature. If they are interested in nature, if they go out into a garden space or a green space and have a good time, they'll want to come back. They can self-direct learning more and trying more and coming back. Also, gross and fine motor skill development. I think Anjali touched on that with that physicality. Gardening is such a great way to get little ones outside. If they're extremely little and they're still developing those fine motor skills, it's a great way to do that. But for all of us, those gross motor skills, right? And sensory benefits as well. I mean, a big part of early childhood development is exposing kids to as many sensory stimuli as possible, and a garden is a fantastic place to do that. Personal responsibility and resiliency. A garden is a really wonderful laboratory for kids to try out caring for a living thing and not just being cared for. And to be responsible for the success or failure of a growth cycle is a really imprinting memory for a lot of kids. And when failures happen, and certainly they will, I think we've all been there, they learn how to deal with an undesired outcome and how to grow their own resiliency and accept outcomes and persevere. I think empathy building is also a really big thing in the garden, and it's what I kind of structure a lot of my activities and lessons around. You can frame small creatures and growing plants as living things that are worthy of respect and admiration, simply by modeling that yourself. If you see a spider, you can say, wow, beautiful spider, look at that, rather than shrieking or trying to stamp it out. You're modeling how these children should think of other small living creatures. And I know that some of us might have feelings about creatures like spiders or slugs or snails or worms. But we have to remember that when we are with children, especially in a garden space, they are going to pick up on those cues from us. So I think if you can get yourself in a space where everything in the garden is worthy of respect and wonder, they are going to learn that from an early age. And I think that transfers to how they respect all living things and other human beings. I have potential dietary impacts, and I say potential because every child's dietary needs and preferences are personal, and they should stay that way. I don't like to talk to kids about their favorite foods as bad or unhealthy. I think that in itself can be a very unhealthy practice, but you can offer a lot of really interesting green foods to kids in a garden space, and they provide the opportunity for them to pick something themselves, to try it. I always say, if you don't like it and it's natural, you can just toss it back in the garden bed. It'll return to the earth. But 9 times out of 10, they pick a mint leaf and they try it and they like it and they want more. I have kids in my garden eating entire chive flowers, which are incredibly spicy, and they chomp them down and want another one. And I have to say, whoa, 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 everybody. There's some magic that happens when a child is able to pick the food themselves and try it themselves. They're that much more likely to say that they like it. And I have had kids let me know after popping a cherry tomato in their mouth in the garden that they have requested tomatoes from their parents for their plates. When they said that they didn't like them before, they learned something new about themselves, that they do in fact like these foods. So that said, I never force kids to try foods that they don't want to. And I always ask kids and their parents or their teachers, depending on who you're with, if there are any allergies before kids try anything. Teamwork and sharing. I've really seen an improvement in children's ability to work together and share materials when they're in the garden. It lends itself to that simply by having a fixed amount of tools or space or materials. You can even intentionally mold your gardening experience with kids by limiting to have a fixed number of tools or seedlings or harvest, and requiring kids to share those things kindly with each other. And they usually will, even if they resist at first for any reason, because it means they get to participate. So those are kind of my benefits, my why. Tips and tricks to keep in mind, whether you're gardening with one child, or maybe you're starting a group, or you're welcoming a group of kids that you know into your garden, or maybe you're like me and you want to try out a school garden. Choose projects that work for your needs. You want to set yourself up for success. An activity might light a fire in you, but if it's not really feasible for the number of children you have or the space that you have, you want to always consider your kids' age and ability levels, your budget, your space, your available time, if you need to maintain something that you're growing, safety concerns, the growing conditions in your area, and consider any activity or any plant that you want to grow or any project through all of those lenses before you start doing that with kids. Also, make sure activities are geared towards equal access. And this is a multifaceted thing. So making sure that you think through how to share any experience that you're doing with kids equally with all the kids that you're with. If that's just a few kids, maybe all get to plant seeds in a plot. If that's 100 kids, maybe everyone makes a seed ball that they can take home and plant in their neighborhood. If you have maybe a plot that you're trying to plant with multiple kids, I like to have people consider collaborative gardening, which is a technique where the kids line up and a certain number, however many steps there are to you planting or fertilizing or trimming or harvesting, and each child gets to do a step and then observe the next child do the next step. So they're learning all of the steps to, for example, planting a seedling, but they're all participating equally. One child digs the hole, the next child puts some compost, the next child plants the seedling in the hole, the next one fills it in, and so on and so on. It can make it easier to have all children involved with a project, whether that's, a group of school kids or a group of grandkids. Not all students are going to be able to, or kids, I should say, not students. I'm still in school garden mode always. Will be physically able to garden the same way. So consider the practical physical needs of the kids that you're gardening with. Raised tabletop beds and vertical gardens can provide access to children who are using wheelchairs, and gloves can be really helpful for children on the autism spectrum if they have sensory needs when it comes to handling soil or any other tasks. And really listen to your kids and make sure that they are comfortable with whatever you're asking them to do. I'm going to share 2 resources from Kids Gardening that are full of great considerations when it comes to garden accessibility. Practicing culturally inclusive gardening. So making sure your garden is an inclusive, loving place is so important. You can grow plants that are culturally significant to people all over the world, including yourself or anyone in your community, and talk about geography and history and culture with kids through this lens. Anjali, you touched on that. I think food and plants are such a great lens through which to connect all of us. You can read garden-themed books together that mirror either your kids' own cultural heritage or provide windows for them to learn about and celebrate other cultures. You can create garden signage if you have a community garden that is in all of the languages that people in your community speak. And I like to say consciously show thanks and exhibit excitement when kids share their personal connections to plants or another name for a plant, even if they're interrupting you in the middle of saying something, always pause and show that excitement and thanks, because oftentimes it's kids who have mustered up the courage to share something with you about themselves, and you're going to give them that positive association if you pause for just a moment and show excitement and thanks. If you have a community garden space, include families and neighbors and garden maintenance days and visiting hours and fundraising, and that exposes all of the kids to more community members. Next, not every minute needs to be filled with a task. I really encourage folks to let kids just explore garden spaces and observe. Those positive associations come from them feeling like they can freely explore things. And kids have a way of unlocking your own knowledge that you hadn't even thought to share with them just by bringing up an observation and being allowed to wander and wonder and consider. And lastly, always be prepared to pivot. Working with kids in any capacity requires flexibility. You might have a whole activity planned and laid out and you're excited to share it with them, but they find a grasshopper and they just want to focus on that. Rather than pulling them away from the grasshopper, it's really important to pivot, because you could talk about that grasshopper with them for a moment, be excited about it, and find a connection from that animal to the thing that you have laid out for them. And remember, if they've formed a positive association with a garden green space, you've succeeded. They're going to come back. I'm going to end with just some of my favorite gardening with kids activity ideas. And remember that you can find activities that fit any needs you have. And our organization, Kids Gardening, is a really great resource for activities and lesson plans and inspiration. I recommend checking out our website and signing up for our newsletter, because we do send out a brand new activity lesson plan and a couple of articles every single month. And it'll go straight to your inbox for sort of monthly seasonal inspiration. Indoors, container gardening is always wonderful and really vastly customizable. But some of my favorite indoor activities that go beyond container gardening are making seed viewers, which involves germinating a big seed inside of a clear cup on a windowsill for about a week or so. Pumpkin seeds and beans are really great for this. Kitchen scrap gardening, where you're growing new food out of food you already have, mostly hydroponically. And making seed balls, my favorite, to toss into unloved spaces in your neighborhood, which is a great way to introduce the concepts of beautification and community service to kids, but also those native plants, right? Talking about how important it is to only use California native seeds. I love wildflower seeds myself, and tossing those into spaces that are appropriate for that. So making sure you're not tossing it into someone's yard or private property without their permission. I've shared links for all of these activity write-ups with CNPS, but you can also find them on our website. And then outdoors, some of my favorite activities are square foot gardening, where you use string to measure out square foot grids, and each child gets 1 square foot that they are responsible for, and they can choose what they want to grow, and they can feel the responsibility and the resiliency if it doesn't go quite right, and experiment with making it go right. That is also a write-up through Kids Gardening that I've shared with CNPS. These next 3 ideas, I don't have links for because they just come from my own experience with the garden, but they involve sort of broader strokes of direction that you can give kids and really tailor to your needs. First is pollinator water fountains. This is a really simple idea that our local pollinators need water just like we do. So you can ask kids to tell you where they get water on a hot day if they're thirsty, and then ask them to think about where a butterfly or a bee might do the same thing on a hot summer day. And the answer is not so clear cut, and it builds empathy because they share a need with these creatures. And you can together design a pollinator water fountain out of simple materials. You just need a shallow container, some rocks or objects like wood chips or bottle caps. You can use recycled materials a lot, which is great. And filling water in that container halfway up those objects creates a safe place for pollinators to land, crawl down, and drink water without getting wet. And you can decorate it with nature treasures and cuttings and fallen leaves with those kids, so they have that expression of creativity. And leave it outside and talk about how important it is to help our pollinators, especially during those hot California summers. Garden Detectives is a game that I play with kids in my garden, where I have a big basket of magnifying glasses. You can see a picture here. These are not my kids, but this is a photo that was submitted to our Kids Gardening photo contest last summer. And having kids guess who lives in our garden or any green space that you're in together, above ground and below ground. And if you give them a magnifying glass and a spoon and talk about some best practices, stay a nice step away from animals who might feel unsafe and try to defend themselves, like spiders or wasps or bees, and be very gentle with all other creatures, especially if you're using your spoon to gently dig into the ground and find grubs or ants or worms. Ask them to go and find out who lives in their green space. And lastly is sensory garden play. I have shared a link with CNPS for information on designing a sensory garden that you can read through. It's got a lot of really great plant selections that you can think about adding. But simply designing a garden specifically for kids, you can do this with labeled sections so kids know where it's safe to touch, where it's safe to taste, things like that. But the rustle of leaves, chirps of birds, counting colors, smelling rosemary, touching fuzzy sage. It's all really, really good for developing brains with young kids. And that's the end. That is my email address. If you have any questions, it's noellen@kidsgardening.org. And thank you so much for your time.
Noelle, thank you so much. There is a lot of love for all of the presentations and for your enthusiasm and your examples that you provided. So thank you so much to all of our presenters. We're going to pivot into a quick Q&A. If you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A feature. And we can try to get to those as well. Just have a couple of kind of predetermined questions here, but we're always happy to take questions from our audience. So let's take a look at that first one. I know, Noelle, you touched on this very, very heavily. I'd love to hear from Anjali and Chantel if you have any other tidbits to share based off of your experience working with kids. Both of you have such unique experience, and Noelle, please feel free to chime in too if there's any other little tidbits of information that you'd like to add in. But yeah, in your experience, how have you seen gardens positively impact youth and youth development? And maybe we can start off hearing just from Anjali and Chantel based off of your experience.
Yeah, so I'll go. I'm very different from obviously having a garden where kids are more active doing the actual gardening. But with our garden, it's amazing to see kids that, like I mentioned, may not have the opportunity to go to green spaces, and having kids go to our garden and just see them wanting to come back, mentioning, oh, I'm going to tell my mom to bring me back and things like that. It's such a nice feeling to know that we're providing that positive experience with nature and having them be more curious and wanting to go back and do more. And we just started this program. It's very new. There's so much more that we want to do, and there's so much more that we could offer. But because we are such a small team, we're slowly but surely getting there. But it's nice to see so many kids just having a good time and learning, and we're happy that we're able to provide a space for that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I keep going back to 1,000 kids already this school year. That's incredible. I would say like what Noelle kind of opened up with, but I would say that when kids are so hungry to be outside, and there's so much possibility for mystery and spontaneity to come through, and for many other aspects of ourselves to have expression and to get developed, that is just not possible when you're not in relationship with the cycles of the earth and the observations of life.
Sort of in connection to this, we do have a question that came through about what many of you would recommend for, or what you would suggest for working with teenagers that aren't generally enthusiastic about being outside or engaging in garden spaces. Is there any kind of follow-up that you can bring to that question?
I think for the most part, when we have older audiences, we try to work with what they like. So technology, right? Even though we kind of try to be like, hey, just enjoy nature. But there is ways to use technology. We're maybe familiar with iNaturalist. So it's a way to encourage kids to use the iNaturalist and feel like they're contributing to science by making observations with the iNaturalist applications. And there's other apps as well where they can feel like they're active scientists and not just doing observations, but kind of helping a bigger plan.
Yeah, I would add working with like middle schoolers and high schoolers, that culturally responsive teaching in the brain, just bringing in a lot of identity piece. One of the workshops I led at CNPS was native plant portraiture, where we looked at Kehinde Wiley and the art of Kehinde Wiley, and then projected native plants onto our bodies and took portraits with that. So like Chantal said, with technology, there's a lot to do even with the identity piece and the artistic piece. And then I think, I mentioned earlier bringing in seeds. Like I brought in seeds to ninth graders, and they just wanted to spend the entire time touching and looking. And so I think things that are physical, things that are, engage in low stakes. I think that's a rule for teenagers, is kind of keep it like you're not trying to answer this scientific formal question, but you're just trying to be in relationship. And through those relationships, that's like the low stakes. Like one of my mentors, she would say, your only responsibility, like we would play music to learn. She'd be like, your only responsibility right now is to listen to the song. And then you scaffold the learning more, but giving teenagers sort of that invitation, like your only responsibility right now is to find as many greens as you can. Your only responsibility right now is to find something that matches your prom dress, and opening up with that.
I think I would add that, especially for kids who are not as enthusiastic about the outdoors, oftentimes the key is through the stomach. Like if you're able to find one of their favorite foods and figure out what plants are in them, you could encourage them to try growing a piece of that themselves. And there's also, a lot of indoor gardening that you can do, especially with things like grow labs and lettuce grow towers and other things where if the kids can come at it from a tech standpoint and just fall in love with watching something grow, you can kind of take it step by step from there, perhaps.
Wonderful. Thank you all so much. I see this comment here in the chat too from Gail. Maybe the youth can also share as teachers as well, which is very, very beautiful. All right. As a follow-up question, what are some ways those that do not have garden spaces where they live, how can they start to engage the youth in their life with gardening, getting them exposed to some of the terms or plants or animals or just anything kind of connected to that? Because I know there may be a few folks within our audience that don't have access to their own garden space. How can they start to engage their youth?
I think right off the bat, take them to go visit Chantal and Anjali. I think I really am a big fan of green spaces and, there being opportunity for exploring and being around nature in our own neighborhoods, whether that's just your neighborhood park, or if you're able to get to any sort of public garden in your area. I think taking them to places it adds even a level of excitement beyond having a garden in the home. And, I love to garden, but I live in an apartment with a balcony and I curate my own little garden on my balcony, which is successful and unsuccessful sometimes, but I'm also able to have a hummingbird feeder by just putting sort of a shepherd's hook prong in a pot on my balcony. So I have a lot of birds that come onto my balcony. I think ways to just, like Anjali said, bring the outside in is also really great if you can find ways to just green your home indoors or on balconies as well.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, like mentioned, even without the actual raw earth, but just to remember that like wherever you're standing is earth, you are. And so noticing and dropping in. LA River has a really beautiful curriculum about thinking about the concentric circles of where you're at and then noticing the life around you. And one of the opening like kinesthetic games I've done with kids is we think about what do the plants need, what sun, what water, what light, what water, what soil, and who are your friends around you. And then having kids in any space pick, because plants are growing through cracks, right? They're growing through walls, they're growing on fences, they're growing everywhere. And that's one way to dissolve plant invisibility around you. And so having them embody a plant, one of the sixth graders became an abagaba plant, where he was running through the cracks of the sidewalk back and forth. And that was his invented plant. But it's really so connected to the plants around. And another student chose to be a plant that was growing out of a tire because that's where they would grow, where the water would collect and they would feel like they would just be getting all their water. So kind of inviting kids to just drop into the life already around them right there.
Yeah, I think, you all said it. I think it's so important to just try and make the most with what we have. Like you said, there's, especially if you live in areas like LA where the greenery is not very accessible. I live in Long Beach and we have a lot of greenery around here, but it's not something for everyone. So definitely starting off with trying to get outdoors if possible, because that unstructured learning allows for such meaningful and interactions with surroundings. And starting with that plant, even if it's just one plant in the balcony, which I think a lot of us live in areas like that where we can't have big gardens, but it teaches responsibility. And like Noelle said, and they think of something other than what do I need, and also it gets kids up and moving to do something else and break that routine, which is so important.
Great, thank you all so much. Anne Marie, can we skip to that last question? I know there are a few folks that are asking about resources or things that you can, like different tools that are available to you. So I'd like to use our last minute to address this question. So for those looking to learn more, what resources would you recommend? Books, articles, podcasts? Noelle, I know you kept throwing in the Kids Gardening website, which has tons of wonderful resources. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with folks right now? We will include everything on our recap email as well, so don't feel pressured to take notes very quickly.
I think one of the big books that's out there right now, it's the one that Anjali mentioned. I think it's called Sweetgrass. I'm sorry, I haven't got into it. It's on my to-do list. And visiting your local areas, your local resources that you have, parks, and there are museums, and like I said, we're working on it, but sign up to newsletters like the one for Noelle's organization, which I even use and I look at because they have amazing resources.
I want to share that braiding sweetgrass has recently been adapted to braiding sweetgrass for young adults. So there is a companion version that you can give to the young adults in your life, which is awesome. I think my other two resources I'd share is that Life Lab in Northern California has a really fun, the work they do is incredible, but their website is so full of really great activities, recipes, videos, all kinds of stuff that I go and look at for inspiration sometimes. And then I was kind of just thinking on our last, I'm a big fallen foraged fruit person. I go all over LA all year long and just find free public fruit. So I'm a big proponent of that. And one of the resources I'd love to share is fallenfruits.org. It is a worldwide project where you can map public fruit trees in your area. Fun fact in LA, if it's on the green space between the sidewalk and the street, it is free. It is public. It is everyone's property. If it's leaning over a fence onto the sidewalk from someone's property, it is public and you can pick it respectfully. Don't pick any fruit from someone's property line. But there is a map, and LA is full of really fun, basically just public orchards that you can take kids on a walk and go find a tree that's in season and pick some food.
Oh my God, that's amazing. I am going to be doing that. I would say I mentioned this in my presentation, but the flashcards, the native plant flashcards, we sell them at the Theater Pain Foundation. And I think they were a collaborative project between CNPS and Theodore Pain Foundation. And it took a few years. They're so great. They are, you can hold them, you can sort them. I have kids sort them based on every day. You could sort them something different, color or size. They have symbols to show how much water, how much sun. They're bilingual. They have little descriptions. They have images of how big the plants get. So you can use them inside. You could take them on a hike with you. You could plan your garden with them. And they're a great resource.
All right, thank you all so much. Those cards are really helpful. I have some myself, to continue my own learning. Anne Marie, can we switch to that last slide, please? All right, so we've reached the end of our presentation. Thank you all so much for staying on a couple minutes after our 6:30 end time. And a big thank you to our wonderful presenters for sharing more about their passion and expertise of working with kids. And hopefully you can take some of these tips and ideas and resources and really bring those to life in your own garden spaces as you take your youth out to other garden spaces like the botanical garden Chantel works at maybe. But please keep in mind, we do have another Naturehood webinar coming up next month on February 2nd, same time. And this time we'll be exploring bringing birds to your garden. So if you're interested in learning more about that, please tune in February 2nd. Thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.